Welcome to our YouTube video series on employment law. My name is Christopher Neufeld of Neufeld Legal. And in this particular video, we'll be discussing the differences between quitting versus negotiating one's exit from long-term employment. And the critical aspect in this whole process is planning in advance of your action. And not simply planning on how you're going to quit, but planning and really looking at where you stand relative to your employment and how you might be able to get the most out of it. Because the worst thing to do, especially with long-term employment, I'm talking about people with decades of experience, even 10 years of experience, but oftentimes decades of experience, is simply thinking about your frustration with the job that you're doing, especially an hourly, hard-working job, and simply saying, you know what, I've had enough. I'm going to step away from this job and be done with it. Now, given the fact that you invested so much time and energy and so much of your life to that particular job, because this is not some fly-by-night decision that you're making, you should not be just making such a rash decision and pushing it forward. You really need to step back for a minute, be rational about it, and where possible, engage with the proper and appropriate professionals to discuss what your options are and how best to approach your situation. Because having invested so much time and energy, you really should be investing appropriate time and energy into your exit. Because what tends to happen is that far too many people, they simply jump at these things. They talk to a couple people, they get frustrated. They maybe look at some videos, they read some literature, and they go out and say, you know what, I'm done. I'm going to walk away from the job. I'm going to give them my notice maybe, but be done with it. And in so doing, they lose out on a lot of opportunity. Because what you really need to do is you need to have a solid plan, a solid approach, and put that plan into effect and operate from the position that you are capable of moving forward and getting the most out of it. Because you don't want to entirely shut down the situation, but you want to look for leverage points. And those leverage points are not necessarily discernible by yourself. You often have to work with experts to identify what those leverage points are and how you can shape them and develop them to your own personal advantage. Because when you've been working for 10, 20, even 30 years at a particular job, putting so much time, you really should be putting in place the approach you need to optimize and maximize your exit. Because there's so much that can be potentially left on the table without you even knowing it, that you might simply walk in and lose that opportunity. So instead, what you really need to do is take a step back. Find those experts, those advisors. Start speaking with them. Start working through the materials you're able to collect even before you've advised your current employer as to what you're planning to do. Start working through that. And once you've got a solid plan in place, you need to be putting that plan into effect in a way that allows you to negotiate without having necessarily quit at that time, but instead making it a productive and informative discussion where you go into the meeting, you set up the meeting with them at your timing and also at their convenience, where you lay out what you're looking for and you put it on the table and you've collected all the information, you've developed your position, you've developed your leverage, and you present it. And if they don't like it, they don't like it. That's all well and good. But you don't necessarily position yourself so that you've quit. Instead, you say, look, do you want to have further discussions? If they want to terminate you, they're going to be put in a very precarious position because then they have the obligation towards yourself with respect to termination pay in lieu of notice, potentially severance pay, and other arrangements that may come out of your contract. But you want to be approaching it in such a way that from a legal standpoint, they cannot say you've quit, you've resigned, you've voluntarily terminated your job. Instead, you want to go into it making the approach such that you're coming into this meeting saying, look, I feel like I've come to the end of my rope. I want to find out where there's a mutually agreeable way that I can end my employment and move forward. But it's not as simple as that. A lot of it has to do with what you've discussed with those experts, with those advisors, and what they've been able to identify. Because oftentimes, especially for long-term employees, and more so for hourly employees who've worked for a long time, there are other aspects to the arrangement that gives the employee leverage, and you have to work on the basis of that leverage. You don't want to necessarily come out with it too fast and too quickly, but you want to hold in a reserve and be able to utilize that. But you're not going to have that leverage if you haven't been able to identify the leverage points. And that's why it's important to have the right counsel, the right lawyers, the right accountants who are looking at this from that perspective, who've gone through the documentation, the paperwork, and seen where you stand and where you can facilitate your exit. And then once you have that, you can negotiate these matters forward. And with those negotiations, you're most likely going to have to actively engage your legal counsel to negotiate on your behalf. You're going to have to engage with your accountants to operate on your behalf, because you're going to be going into this, taking them aback. And what is your employer going to do? Your employer is naturally going to end up bringing in their lawyers and accountants and their internal experts to make those determinations. Because if they go about and making a rash decision saying, screw you, be on your way, we're not going to negotiate, at least you have your leverage points with which to deal with the situation. Given the fact that you've wanted to, in a professional and sensible way, discuss your situation and discuss aspects of moving forward and moving on, and then they make the determination that they want you out, well, that's up to them. And you have to be ready for that. But you have to be undertaking it in a proper and very precise manner. So you've protected yourself, you protected your financial interests, you protected your family's financial interests. And in so doing, you can make the exit that you want to without having simply quit your job, your long-term employment, but instead have positioned yourself to see to the next phase of your life, the next phase of your career, as you move forward with the financial security and assurances that you should be having in place and wanting, especially after decades of work for the same employer. Thank you.